AITA for cutting off my best friend after she used me as her backup plan. I, 29F, had a best friend, Claire, 28F, for nearly 15 years. We met in high school and were inseparable. We went to the same college, lived together for a while, and always had each other's backs. I considered her family. I would have done anything for her. For most of our 20s, Claire was in a long-term relationship with her boyfriend, Jake, 30M. They had a very on-again, off-again relationship, constantly breaking up and getting back together. It was exhausting to watch, but I supported her no matter what. Every time they broke up, I was the one she cried to. Every time they got back together, she'd slowly start ignoring me again. I was used to it. A couple of years ago, I started dating my boyfriend, Adam, 31M. He is an incredible person, kind, stable, and emotionally mature. The opposite of Jake in many ways. From the start, Claire didn't like Adam. She wasn't outright rude to him, but she made comments. Little things like, "Are you sure you're ready to settle down?" Or, "You guys moved in together so fast." She always had something to say. Meanwhile, her relationship with Jake continued to be a mess. They were constantly fighting, breaking up, and making up. I spent countless nights on the phone with her, listening to her cry about how Jake treated her, how he ignored her feelings, how he always put himself first. I always told her she deserved better, but she never listened. Then about 6 months ago, things took a turn. Claire called me in tears. Jake had broken up with her again, this time for good. He had met someone else, and Claire was devastated. She told me she felt like her entire life had fallen apart. I did what I always did. I dropped everything to be there for her. I canceled plans, sat with her while she cried, and listened to hours of her venting about how unfair it was. After a couple of weeks, Claire started acting strange. She was suddenly overly interested in my life, my relationship with Adam, and how happy I was. She asked a lot of questions, things she had never cared about before. Do you ever get bored in your relationship? Do you think Adam is really the one? Have you ever thought about what it would be like to be single again? At first, I thought she was just projecting because of her breakup. But then, she started making comments about how lucky I was that I had someone stable to fall back on. How smart I was to settle before it was too late. She even joked once, "At least if things go bad for me, I know you'll always have a couch for me to crash on." Then one night, she dropped a bombshell. We were out for drinks, and she casually said, "I was thinking, if neither of us are married by the time we're 35, we should just move in together and be each other's partners in life." I laughed it off at first, thinking she was joking. But she wasn't. She was serious. She went on about how we've always been there for each other, how men come and go, but friendship is forever, and how she was realizing that maybe she didn't need a romantic relationship, just a solid backup plan. That was when it hit me. Claire had never actually valued me as a person. I was her backup plan, the safety net she kept in her pocket in case her real relationships didn't work out. All those years of dropping everything for her, being her emotional support system, listening to her problems while she ignored mine. It wasn't about friendship. It was about convenience. I asked her, "Would you have said this if Jake hadn't broken up with you?" She hesitated for too long before saying, "Well, probably not, but that's not the point." That was the point. She didn't see me as an equal. She saw me as an option. I told her that I wasn't her safety net, and I wasn't interested in being anyone's backup plan. I had a real relationship, a real life, and I wasn't going to put it on hold just because she was afraid of being alone. Claire got defensive, saying I was overreacting and that I was misunderstanding her. I left that night feeling heartbroken. 15 years of friendship, and this is what it was? Just me being a placeholder in her life until she found something better? A couple of days later, I decided to distance myself. I stopped answering her texts right away. I made excuses when she wanted to hang out. I wasn't rude. I just started putting myself first for once. Claire noticed. She started texting me more, asking what was wrong, saying she felt like I was pulling away. I finally told her the truth. I said, "I feel like you don't actually value me as a person, just as someone to be there when things don't work out for you. And I don't think that's a real friendship." She flipped out. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning her when she needed me the most, of throwing away years of friendship over a single comment. She told me I was being cruel and that she never expected me to be so heartless. I held my ground. I told her that I had spent years putting her first, and for once, I was choosing myself. I said that I wished her the best, but I wasn't going to keep being her emotional crutch. She hasn't spoken to me since. Mutual friends are divided. Some say I did the right thing by standing up for myself, while others think I should have been more understanding because she was going through a hard time. Now, months later, I still feel a mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger. It's hard to let go of a friendship that was such a huge part of my life. But at the same time, I realize now that I was never a priority to her. She only cared about me when it was convenient. So, AITA for finally choosing myself after years of being treated like a backup plan. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more awesome videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. Thanks for your support. AITA for choosing my career over my family and causing a huge rift. I'm a 29-year-old woman, and I've been working in tech for almost 7 years now. I've always been someone who's driven by career goals, and I know that's not always seen as a good thing. But it's who I am. I've worked hard to get to where I am, and I'm finally at a point where I'm making a good salary, have job stability, and can enjoy some of the luxuries that come with it. I grew up in a small town where everyone knows everyone, and most people end up staying and living out their lives there. My parents, especially my mom, always had big dreams for me to have a more traditional life. They've never really understood my ambitions, especially since I'm the first person in our family to have a career like mine. In their eyes, success meant marrying early, having kids, buying a house, and settling down in a comfortable, predictable life. I've never been into that. I've always been more focused on my career and on building something for myself that I could be proud of. Growing up, my parents pushed me to focus more on family, things like holidays, getting together, and being involved in the community. I couldn't always relate to the other kids my age who were obsessed with getting married or having kids. It felt like my entire family was trying to get me to follow this script of what my life should look like, and I just wasn't interested. But I've always loved what I do, working in tech, developing software, creating systems that help companies function better. And I've worked my ass off to get to where I am. That all came to a head recently when my mom asked me to come back to the town for a family gathering. It was a weekend thing, and it wasn't even a holiday, just one of those get-togethers that families sometimes arrange to reconnect. My mom made it clear that it was important for her, and that she missed me. She also mentioned that it would be nice for me to start thinking about the future, specifically about having a family of my own. I get that she's concerned because I'm getting older. 29 isn't ancient, but I guess it is in her eyes. But I felt uncomfortable with how much pressure she was putting on me. It wasn't the first time she had talked about this, and to be honest, it felt like the 1,000th time. I've tried to explain to her that I'm not interested in settling down right now. I'm not against relationships or having a family eventually, but it's just not something I want to prioritize right now. I'm too focused on my career, and I really enjoy the freedom that comes with being single and focusing on my goals. That said, I still try to be there for my family when they need me. I call, I visit, I do my best to stay involved. The gathering came up, and I had a big deadline at work. I had spent weeks working on this project, and if I missed this deadline, it could really set me back. I had already been working long hours, and the thought of leaving the city to go back to the small town just wasn't something I was excited about. I could already picture the awkward conversations with my relatives, the judgment from my mom about not having a real life outside of work, and the pressure to conform to some kind of ideal that I wasn't interested in. I told my mom I couldn't make it. I said I had to work, that it was a priority, and that I hoped we could catch up at another time. She was upset, but I didn't think it was a big deal at first. Then, my dad called me and said that I was being selfish. He said that family was important, and I shouldn't be putting my career over my relationship with them. My mom had been crying, apparently, and he told me I should be more considerate of her feelings. That stung because I felt like I was being considerate by trying to avoid making the trip just to end up in a bunch of awkward, forced conversations. The situation escalated when my cousin, who's more like a brother to me, messaged me. He said that my decision to skip out on the gathering had upset everyone, and that it was causing a lot of drama. I was genuinely surprised. I thought that if I had just been upfront with them, they'd understand. But it turns out my mom had been talking to the whole family about it. My absence had become a topic of gossip, and apparently, I was being painted as the person who abandoned their family for their career. The whole thing felt ridiculous, and I honestly didn't think I was doing anything wrong. I tried explaining to my mom that I loved her and the family, but I had a responsibility to my job, too. That this was part of being an adult, and that sometimes things came up. She didn't take it well. She said that I didn't know how to balance my life, that I was too obsessed with work, and that I didn't care about them. That stung. I'd always try to be there for her emotionally, to offer support when she needed it, and I felt like she was completely disregarding all the other ways I try to show my love. Eventually, my aunt got involved. She sent me a long message about how I was being cold-hearted and that I was ruining family relationships by choosing work over them. She also brought up the idea that I was getting too old to be putting off the important things like marriage and kids, as if somehow my whole life was supposed to revolve around that. I've never wanted a traditional life, but my family seems to think that's the only path to happiness. They don't get why I don't want to follow their expectations. I've tried to reach out to my mom and dad, but every time I try, I get met with resistance or guilt trips. I'm not really sure what to do now. I feel like I'm stuck between two worlds, my career and my family, and no matter what I do, someone is going to be upset. I get that family is important, but I also don't think I should have to sacrifice my career goals and my happiness to make them happy. I've been trying to keep the peace, but it feels like I'm just disappointing everyone. I'm not sure if I made the wrong choice, if I should have gone to the family gathering and just sucked it up, or if I'm just being too focused on myself. I've been called selfish, cold-hearted, and distant, but it feels like my family doesn't respect my choices and is constantly trying to force me into a mold that isn't mine. So, AITA for prioritizing my career over family, or should I have just gone and dealt with the discomfort to avoid causing this rift? AITA for kicking my brother and his kids out after they took over my house. I, 32F, have worked really hard to build a stable life for myself. I bought my own house 5 years ago, a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. I've always been responsible with money, and I made sacrifices to be able to afford it. I live alone, and I like it that way. My home is my space, my sanctuary, and I enjoy the peace and quiet. My older brother, Mark, 38M, has always been the complete opposite. He's always struggled with stability, bouncing between jobs, apartments, and relationships. He has 2 kids, Mia, 10F, and Caleb, 7M, from a previous relationship. Their mom is not in the picture, so Mark has full custody. I love my niece and nephew, and I've always tried to be a good aunt. I babysit when I can and help out financially when necessary, but I've always made it clear that I have my own life and responsibilities. A few months ago, Mark called me in a panic. He had lost his job, fallen behind on rent, and was getting evicted. He had nowhere to go, and he asked if he and the kids could stay with me just for a few weeks until he got back on his feet. I hesitated. I knew Mark's history. I knew how he operated, but I couldn't let my niece and nephew be homeless. I made it clear that this was temporary. I said he could stay for 1 month while he figured things out. I told him I expected him to actively look for a job, save up, and find a new place. He agreed. The first few days were fine. The kids were happy to be in a stable home, and I was glad they weren't in a bad situation. But it didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. First, Mark made 0 effort to find a job. I'd come home from work and find him on the couch watching TV. Every time I asked if he had applied for anything, he'd say something like, "I'm looking, but it's tough right now," or "I need to wait until I find the right thing." He wasn't even trying. Then the kids started taking over the house. I get that kids can be messy, but they trashed my home. They spilled food on my couch, left toys everywhere, and wrote on my walls. I asked Mark multiple times to clean up after them, but he either ignored me or got defensive, saying, "They're just kids." On top of that, Mark started inviting people over without asking. One day I came home and found 3 of his friends in my living room. Another time, he let his ex-girlfriend stay the night without even telling me. I reminded him that this was my house and that he needed to respect my rules. He just rolled his eyes and said I was being dramatic. The final straw came when I found out he was using my money without asking. I keep a small emergency fund in cash in my bedroom, Nothing crazy, just a few $100s. One day I went to grab some, and it was gone. I confronted Mark, and he admitted he had taken it. He said he needed it for the kids and that he was going to pay me back. I lost it. I told him that stealing from me was unacceptable, and he just shrugged, acting like I was overreacting. That night, I told him he had 1 week to leave. He flipped out. He accused me of abandoning him and the kids, of kicking them out on the street, and of being heartless. He called our parents, who immediately took his side. They called me, saying that I was being cruel, that family helps family, and that I should be more understanding because he's struggling. I stood my ground. I told them that I was not their solution. I had given Mark a chance, and he had completely taken advantage of me. He wasn't even trying to get his life together. He was just mooching off me. When I told Mark he had a week, he ignored me. He acted like it wasn't happening. When the deadline came, I told him he needed to leave that day. He refused. He said he had nowhere to go. I ended up calling the police to remove him. It was humiliating and heartbreaking, but I didn't see another option. Now my entire family is against me. My parents won't speak to me, my relatives are calling me selfish, and even some of my friends think I should have handled it differently. They keep saying, it was just temporary, and you could have given him more time. But I don't think I did anything wrong. I gave him a chance. I was clear about my boundaries, and he completely disregarded them. I feel guilty about my niece and nephew, but at the end of the day, they are his responsibility, not mine. So, AITA for kicking my brother and his kids out after they took over my house? AITA for refusing to go to my brother's wedding after he insulted my fiancée and not telling anyone why. This is a long one, so buckle up. I, 28M, have a brother Tom, 31M, who's always been the golden child in our family. He's got everything going for him. High-paying job, perfect wife, seemingly perfect life. Growing up, I always felt like I was the less successful sibling. Tom was the one my parents bragged about to friends, the one they asked for advice, the one who could do no wrong. On the other hand, I was the quiet, more introverted one, into computers and gaming, always a little more awkward in social situations. Our relationship was never bad, but it was definitely strained because of how different we were and how my parents seemed to favor him. Fast forward to a few months ago, and Tom got engaged to his longtime girlfriend, Melissa, 30F. They've been dating for over 5 years, and while they're not perfect, they seem happy enough. The issue started when Tom invited my fiancée, Emma, 27F, and me to their engagement party. Emma and I have been together for 2 years now, and I thought everything was going great between us. She's amazing, smart, funny, and a bit quirky, which I love. We've talked about getting married in the future, but we're not in a rush. At the engagement party, Melissa and my mom were both gushing about how perfect Tom and Melissa are as a couple, and it seemed like they were constantly comparing them to other people. They were mentioning how they were so organized, how Tom had planned the whole thing, how everything about their relationship was just flawless. Emma and I tried to stay out of it, but I noticed that they kept dropping comments that made us feel a little awkward. There was a moment where my mom even said to Emma, "You'll get there eventually. Tom and Melissa have it all figured out." It was a weird vibe, but I tried to shake it off. I didn't think much of it at the time. That is, until the next day. Tom and I were chatting about the wedding plans when he casually brought up how he didn't think Emma was right for me. He said, "She seems nice enough, but she's not really your type, you know? You should be with someone who's more, I don't know, serious. Someone with more ambition, I guess. She just seems a little, too laid back, don't you think?" This threw me off completely. First of all, I've never cared about type in terms of how a person looks or acts. Emma is who I want to be with, and I love her for who she is. I couldn't believe Tom would just casually dismiss her like that. I tried to stay calm and not get defensive, but I couldn't help myself. I said, "What the hell are you talking about? She's smart, driven, and the most supportive person I know. Just because she doesn't live up to some idea of what a partner should be doesn't mean she's not the right person for me." Tom just shrugged and said, "I'm just saying, you could do better. Melissa is perfect for me. She's got her life together. You should think about that before you get too serious with Emma." I was stunned. I had no idea where this was coming from. Emma and I had been nothing but supportive of Tom and Melissa, And here he was judging our relationship. It felt like a betrayal. My brother had never outright insulted my choice in a partner before, and I didn't know how to process it. I didn't want to make a scene at the engagement party, so I just let it go. But this comment stuck with me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. How dare he tell me I could do better? How dare he imply that Emma wasn't good enough for me? The wedding planning continued, and the tension between us kept building. I started to notice how much of Tom's perfect life seemed like a constant competition. Every time he would talk about his wedding plans, he'd bring up how many better things he had compared to what I had. He mentioned his wedding venue, a high-end place with a view of the city, and how expensive it was, and then said, I know you're on a budget, but maybe you should aim for something that's a little more impressive when you do get married. I tried to brush it off, but it was clear to me that he saw our lives as some kind of race. The final straw came a couple of weeks before his wedding. He called me up to discuss something, and in the conversation, he again brought up my relationship with Emma. He started asking questions like, so, when are you planning on popping the question? If you're really serious about her, you should make it official. Otherwise, she might start questioning your commitment. I was done. I told him to stop talking about my relationship with Emma because it was none of his business. I said I didn't appreciate how he was constantly undermining my choices, especially when it came to my fiancée. He tried to apologize, but I could tell he didn't really mean it. Then the kicker came. He told me, I just want you to know that if you ever get serious about Emma, you'll never have the perfect life I do. Maybe you should just take some time to think about what you want, instead of rushing into something that won't work. I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped and told him that I wasn't going to be part of a wedding where my own brother doesn't respect my choices, especially regarding the woman I planned to spend my life with. I told him I wouldn't attend the wedding and that he had crossed the line. He was furious. He said I was overreacting and that I was making everything about myself. Our parents called me, and my mom begged me to go, saying I was being petty and childish. But I stood my ground. I refused to go to a wedding where I felt disrespected, and I made it clear to everyone that I wasn't comfortable with the way Tom had treated me and Emma. The family was torn. Some of them said I was in the right, but others thought I was making a huge mistake by not going. My dad said I should have just let it go for the sake of family harmony, but I didn't want to reward Tom's behavior. My friends were supportive of my decision, but they also thought it was a tough call. The wedding came and went, and I didn't attend. I stayed home with Emma, who had been incredibly supportive of my decision. She was upset about what Tom said too, but she didn't want me to feel like I had to choose between her and my family. Now, the aftermath. Tom hasn't spoken to me since. He sent me a text saying, I guess I know where I stand with you. I'm disappointed, but I guess this is how you want things. I haven't responded. Our parents are still upset with me, but they understand why I did it. They just don't think it was worth cutting ties over. So, AITA for refusing to go to my brother's wedding after he insulted my fiancée and not telling anyone why? Or should I have just sucked it up and gone for the sake of family? AITA for telling my parents I won't take care of my sister anymore after they dumped her on me for years? I, 28F, have a younger sister, Emily, 17F, and for most of my life, I have been more of a parent to her than our actual parents. My mom and dad were the type who had kids because it was the next step in their lives, not because they actually wanted to be parents. They worked a lot, traveled a lot, and basically treated me as free childcare from the moment Emily was born. I remember being 11 years old and having to wake up in the middle of the night to feed a crying baby because my parents were too tired from work. When I was 13, I had to miss my best friend's birthday party because my parents made last-minute dinner plans and left Emily with me. By the time I was 16, I was the one taking her to school, helping her with homework, cooking for her, and making sure she had everything she needed. I was never asked to do these things. I was expected to. If I ever pushed back, my parents would guilt-trip me, saying things like, family helps family, or, you're a sister, not a babysitter, so stop acting like it's a chore. But they didn't act like parents either. They were just supervisors who popped in now and then to check that we were still alive. When I turned 18, I moved out for college. I thought that was my chance to finally have my own life. But my parents started calling me every single day about Emily. They needed me to pick her up from school. They needed me to tutor her. They needed me to talk to her because she was having a bad day. When she got sick, they asked if she could stay at my dorm so they wouldn't catch it, I love Emily, and I don't blame her for any of this. She didn't ask to be dumped on me either. But it reached a breaking point when I graduated college and moved to another city for work. My parents were furious. They said I was abandoning the family and being selfish. They didn't care that I had spent my entire childhood raising their kid. They only cared that I was no longer available to do it. For the first time, I set a boundary. I told them I wasn't going to be their backup parent anymore. If they needed help occasionally, I'd be there, but Emily was their responsibility. My parents pretended to agree, but they didn't change. Instead, they started emotionally manipulating Emily, telling her that I didn't care about her because I wasn't around as much. They turned her against me, and it broke my heart. But then, when Emily turned 14, everything changed. My parents went on an extended trip that was supposed to last 2 weeks. Instead, they just never came back. I don't know what excuse they gave Emily, but they told me they were taking time for themselves and that Emily would be fine because she had me. They fully abandoned her. At 25, I became a legal guardian overnight. I had no choice. I couldn't let my sister end up in the system. She moved in with me, and I took care of everything: school, food, bills, emotional support. I tried my best to give her a stable home and make her feel loved, but I was so angry at my parents. They still called, but only to tell me how proud they were of me for stepping up. They didn't offer money, help, or even a real apology. They just expected me to handle it. Fast forward to now. Emily is 17 and about to graduate high school. My parents suddenly reappeared and started acting like they had been involved the entire time. They're talking about how excited they are for her future, how they can't wait to be part of her next chapter, and this is the kicker. They expect me to keep taking care of her until she's fully independent. They pulled me aside and said, "We appreciate everything you've done, but she's still young, and you're the best person to guide her into adulthood." They even suggested that Emily stay with me a few more years while she gets on her feet. They framed it as a favor, like I was just helping out for a little longer. I lost it. I told them that they had abandoned their own child and that I was done picking up their mess. I said I had given up my entire youth to raise their kid, and I refused to do it any longer. If Emily needed anything, they could figure it out. They called me selfish. They said I was throwing her away after acting like her mom for so long. I said, "Exactly. I am not her mom. You are." Emily was heartbroken when she heard the argument. She told me she felt like a burden, and I reassured her that she wasn't the problem. Our parents were. But she's torn. They're still her parents, and I know she wants their approval. Now my parents are playing the victims. They're telling everyone that I turned Emily against them and that I kicked her out, even though she's not even leaving yet. They're also saying that since I've already done so much, it only makes sense for me to finish the job. Some relatives agree, saying I should just see it through and not abandon her at the finish line. I feel guilty. I love my sister, and I don't want her to feel unwanted. But I also feel like I've given up enough of my life to clean up my parents' mess. I want my own life. I want to be able to make decisions without having to factor in a responsibility I never agreed to. So, AITA for telling my parents I won't take care of my sister anymore after they dumped her on me for years? AITA for cutting off my best friend after she lied about my parenting and embarrassed me in front of my entire family? I, 29F, have been friends with Sarah, 30F, for over 10 years. We met in college and have been through thick and thin together. We've supported each other through breakups, job changes, personal struggles, and, most recently, the birth of my son, Noah, too. Sarah has always been a bit dramatic, and we've had our ups and downs, but I've always been there for her, and she's been there for me. Or so I thought. To give some context, I've always been someone who's pretty private when it comes to my family life. I don't post a ton of pictures of Noah online, I don't talk about every milestone, and I've always kept my parenting style pretty close to my chest. I'm not someone who feels the need to justify my choices to others, especially when it comes to things like sleep schedules, discipline, or what I feed him. I do what works for us, and I make sure that Noah is loved, safe, and well cared for. Over the last few months, I've been feeling a little more isolated, especially after having a baby. I don't always have the energy to go out, and I've found that the friends I had before Noah were not necessarily the best fit for my new life. I've tried to stay in touch with Sarah, but our relationship had started to feel a little strained. Sarah doesn't have kids, and we've always had a bit of a disconnect when it comes to talking about parenting. She would often make comments like, "You can't let him control you like that," or "Why do you always pick him up when he cries? He's just manipulating you." I tried to brush these comments off, but they were starting to build up, and I started feeling like she didn't understand me as a parent. It all came to a head at my family's annual summer barbecue. We had invited a bunch of close family and friends, including Sarah. It was supposed to be a fun, low-key day with good food, games, and catching up. Everything was going fine until Noah had a tantrum. He's 2, so tantrums are pretty common, especially when he doesn't get his way. That day, he was tired and hungry, and he threw a fit when I told him it was time to eat lunch instead of playing outside. I did what I always do. I calmly tried to get him to calm down, spoke to him at his level, and offered him a snack to distract him. I was firm but gentle, and after a few minutes, he calmed down and sat down to eat. The whole thing lasted less than 5 minutes, but during that time, Sarah was standing nearby watching. She didn't say anything in the moment, but as soon as Noah was settled and everyone had returned to eating, she pulled me aside. She said, "You know, you're spoiling him by letting him get away with that. You really shouldn't let him throw tantrums like that in public. It's embarrassing for you and for him." I was caught off guard. I've always been very conscious of how I handle my son's behavior in public, and I don't believe in letting him get away with things. But I also know that toddlers have emotions they can't always control. I calmly told Sarah that Noah was just tired, and that I wasn't going to shame him for having a natural emotional response. She didn't stop there. She kept going, saying, "It's not just that, though. I've seen you baby him so much. You're making him overly dependent on you. You're not doing him any favors." At this point, I was starting to feel defensive. I told her that I didn't appreciate her comments, especially not in front of everyone, and that I was doing the best I could. She brushed it off and said, "I'm just trying to help. You're making things harder on yourself, you know?" I didn't want to make a scene, so I walked away from the conversation, but the damage had already been done. Sarah's words had started to stick in my mind, and the more I thought about it, the more upset I became. I couldn't understand why she thought it was okay to criticize my parenting in front of my family, especially when I hadn't asked for her opinion. But it didn't stop there. Later on in the day, when the barbecue was winding down, I noticed that Sarah was talking to my aunt, Lisa, 50SF, and my cousin, Amy, 27F. They were standing a little too close to where I could overhear them, and I realized they were talking about me. Specifically, Sarah was telling them about the tantrum incident earlier in the day. She was saying that I was overindulging Noah and that I needed to be more strict with him. She went into detail about how I was spoiling him and letting him get away with everything. I was furious. Not only was she spreading lies about how I handle Noah, but she was making it sound like I was a bad parent to my family. I decided I couldn't let this slide. I walked over to them and said, "Sarah, I really don't appreciate you talking about my parenting like this behind my back. If you have an issue with how I raised Noah, you should have come to me directly." She looked taken aback, and everyone else went silent. Sarah tried to backpedal, saying, "I didn't mean it like that. I was just concerned," but I was done. I told her that if she didn't respect my choices as a mother, I didn't think our friendship could continue. I told her that I didn't need someone who would undermine me in front of my family and make me feel like I wasn't doing enough. That was the last time I spoke to Sarah. Since then, she's texted me a couple of times apologizing for what she said, but I can't shake the feeling that she doesn't really understand why I'm upset. Her apology felt more like a way to clear her conscience than an actual attempt to take responsibility for her actions. She even implied that I was overreacting and that it wasn't that big of a deal. I'm torn. I've always valued my friendship with Sarah, but this situation has made me question her respect for me as a person and as a mother. I feel like she overstepped and embarrassed me in front of my family, and now she's minimizing her behavior. I don't know if I should just let it go and move forward, or if cutting her off is the right thing to do. My family is divided on this too. Some of them think I'm right to stand up for myself, while others think I'm being too harsh and should try to forgive her. But I can't help but feel that her behavior was not only disrespectful, but also a violation of the trust we've built over the years. So, AITA for cutting off my best friend after she lied about my parenting and embarrassed me in front of my family? Should I have handled it differently? Or was I right to end our friendship over this? AITA for refusing to take care of my elderly father after he abandoned me as a kid. I, 35M, was raised by a single mom. My father, 62M, left when I was 4 years old. He didn't die. He didn't get sent away. He just left. He walked out on us one night, and that was it. No child support, no birthday cards, no phone calls. He vanished. My mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and even though she struggled, she never once made me feel like a burden. She always told me that I was loved, and she never badmouthed my father, even though he deserved it. She just told me that some people aren't meant to be parents, and we had to take care of each other. I grew up hearing stories about my father from my extended family, though. He didn't leave because he was poor or struggling. He left because he didn't want to be a dad. He remarried a few years later and had 2 more kids. This time, he actually stayed. He raised them, paid for their education, and gave them everything he never gave me. I remember being a teenager and finding out that my father had a whole other family just a few towns over. I even saw pictures of them on social media. Him at his son's baseball games, him at his daughter's graduation, him smiling like a proud father. Meanwhile, I was working after school to help my mom pay rent. I won't lie, it hurt. It made me feel like I wasn't good enough. Like I was so easy to walk away from that he never even looked back. But I moved on. I focused on my own life. I put myself through college, built a career, and tried to let go of the resentment. Fast forward to last year. My father's wife passed away, and a few months later, he had a stroke. He lost a lot of mobility and can't fully take care of himself anymore. His kids, my half-siblings, have refused to take him in. They say they can't handle it and aren't in the right place in life to be full-time caretakers. So, guess who they call? Yep, me. I got a message from my half-sister, who I have literally never spoken to before, telling me that Dad really needs you right now. She wrote this long, guilt-trippy message about how family takes care of each other and how he regrets the past and wants to make amends. She even said it would be a great opportunity for us to reconnect and heal old wounds. I ignored the message at first. Then she called. She actually had the audacity to say, "I know you had a complicated relationship with Dad, but at the end of the day, he's still your father, and he needs you." I laughed. I actually laughed. I told her, "No, he's your father, not mine." She got upset and said that since I was more stable than her and our brother, I should step up. I told her that he made his choices decades ago, and I am not his son. He made that clear when he walked out on me. I owe him nothing. After that, the floodgates opened. My father himself called me, crying about how he was so sorry and wished he had been there. He said he knew he had made mistakes, but that he needed his son now. He begged me to just talk to him in person, to consider letting him stay with me while he recovered. I asked him one question. "Would you have done the same for me?" He went silent. Then he said, "I know I wasn't the best father," and I cut him off. I told him he wasn't a father at all. He was just some guy who happened to be involved in my conception. A real father doesn't disappear for 30 years and only show up when he needs something. I told him I wished him the best, but I was not going to be in his life. Since then, my phone has been blowing up. My half-siblings say I'm a monster for abandoning an old man in his time of need. Relatives I haven't heard from in years are messaging me, telling me to be the bigger person. Even my mom, the woman he left to struggle alone, says that while she understands my feelings, she thinks I might regret not at least hearing him out. But I don't think I will. He had 30 years to make things right. He never even tried. And now that the kids he actually raised don't want to deal with him, suddenly I'm family again? I don't think so. So, AITA for refusing to take care of my father after he abandoned me? AITA for refusing to let my sister-in-law stay with us after she disrespected our house rules and boundaries? So, a bit of context before I dive into the situation. I, 27F, have been married to my husband, Ryan, 29M, for just over 2 years. We don't have kids yet, but we live in a small, cozy house that we've been working hard to make our own. We both have demanding jobs, and we're also trying to maintain a healthy balance of work and life, so we've set certain boundaries at home that work for us. Our house is our sanctuary, and we do everything we can to keep it organized, peaceful, and respectful of each other's space. Ryan's sister, Ellie, 25F, is a lovely person, but she's always been a bit disorganized and, well, a little bit of a free spirit. She's the type of person who has never been good at keeping a schedule, doesn't have a steady job, she bounces around from gig to gig, and has always struggled with boundaries. Over the years, she's stayed with us a couple of times when she needed a place to crash, and while it hasn't been ideal, we've always been happy to help her out. She's family, and we want to support her when we can. But this last time, things took a turn, and now I'm questioning if I made the right decision. About a month ago, Ellie came to us asking if she could stay with us for a few weeks. She had gotten into a bit of a situation with her roommates. I'm still not entirely sure what happened there, but it involved a fight and her needing to leave suddenly, and didn't have anywhere else to go. She didn't want to stay with her parents because they live a few hours away, so she asked if she could crash with us for a bit. Ryan and I discussed it, and we both agreed that it would be okay as long as she followed a few simple house rules we've established. No smoking inside, cleaning up after herself, and respecting our schedules, especially when it comes to quiet time in the evenings. We've had problems with her respecting these boundaries in the past, but we thought we'd give it another shot. She promised she would be respectful and not cause any problems, and since she's family, we figured it'd be okay. I should have known from the start that this was a bad idea. When Ellie first moved in, things started off fine. She was being friendly, and we did our best to make her feel welcome. But after the first week, things started to get messy. Ellie never cleaned up after herself, leaving her things all over the house. There were dirty dishes in the kitchen, food wrappers on the coffee table, and empty bottles of water strewn around. It wasn't just occasional, it was constant. I tried to bring it up gently, saying, "Hey, Ellie, could you make sure to clean up after yourself when you're done? We got a system in place here that keeps things running smoothly." She'd nod and say she'd do better, but the mess would only get worse. I didn't want to start a confrontation right away, so I let it slide for a bit, thinking maybe she just needed a little reminder. But then it started getting worse. One night, after Ryan and I had been in bed for a few hours, I woke up to the sound of loud music coming from the living room. I went to check, and there she was, sitting on the couch with the TV blaring at full volume, snacks scattered all over the place. I asked her to turn the volume down, since we both had to work early the next day, and she acted like it was no big deal. She said, "Oh, sorry. I didn't realize it was that late," but didn't bother to adjust the volume until I insisted. This wasn't the first time this had happened either. A few days after that, I found out that she'd been smoking in the bathroom. Ryan and I have a strict no-smoking rule in the house, and I specifically told Ellie when she moved in that this was a hard limit. When I confronted her about it, she shrugged and said, "I didn't think it was that big of a deal. It's just a small bathroom." I explained that it was a huge deal and that we didn't want the smell lingering in the house. She apologized, but didn't seem to take it seriously. The tipping point came a week ago. Ryan and I had planned a quiet evening at home. We'd been looking forward to it all week, and we were finally going to watch a movie, eat some takeout, and just relax. But when we got home, we found Ellie had invited a friend over without telling us. The friend, who we had never met before, was sitting on our couch, eating our food and watching TV. I was furious, especially since Ellie knew we had plans for the night. I told her that it wasn't okay to invite people over without asking first, and she seemed surprised that I was upset. She apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again, but by this point, I was fed up. I talked to Ryan about it, and we both agreed that we needed to have a serious conversation with Ellie. We didn't want to kick her out, but we also couldn't keep tolerating the constant disrespect for our space and our rules. We sat her down and told her that while we understood she was going through a rough patch, her behavior was making it very difficult for us to continue living together. We asked her to respect our boundaries, clean up after herself, and be more considerate of our time and space. She apologized, but seemed really defensive. She said, "I don't get why you're making such a big deal out of this. I'm going through a hard time, and I just want to feel at home here. It's not like I'm doing anything horrible." I tried to explain that it wasn't about her going through a hard time, but about respecting the space that Ryan and I had worked so hard to create. We didn't want to feel like we had to walk on eggshells in our own home. She said she understood and would do better. But then, the next day, I came home from work to find that she had invited another friend over while Ryan and I were out. They were having drinks, playing music loudly, and the house was a mess again. This was the final straw for me. I walked up to Ellie and told her that I was done. I told her that she could not stay with us anymore and that she needed to find somewhere else to go. She was shocked and started crying, saying that I was being unreasonable and that I was just punishing her for being in a tough spot. I told her that I wasn't punishing her, but that we needed our space and that I couldn't keep tolerating the lack of respect. She left soon after, but not without telling me that I had ruined our relationship and that I'd never understand her situation. Since then, things have been really awkward. Ryan is on my side and agrees that I was right to set boundaries, but Ellie is still upset, and my in-laws are giving me the cold shoulder. They think I overreacted and that I should have been more patient with her, considering her situation. They've called me a few times, asking me to reconsider, but I'm standing firm. I feel like I've been more than generous with Ellie, and I can't keep sacrificing my peace of mind for the sake of avoiding conflict. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister-in-law stay with us after she disrespected our house rules and boundaries? Should I have been more understanding of her situation, or was I right to enforce boundaries in my own home? AITA for refusing to help my brother after he burned every bridge with me? I, 32M, have an older brother, Jake, 38M. Growing up, Jake was always the golden child. My parents weren't necessarily bad people, but they had this idea that Jake was the leader of the family because he was the firstborn. He got more privileges, more praise, and more understanding whenever he messed up. Meanwhile, I was expected to be the responsible one, the mature one, the one who let things slide when Jake did something selfish or reckless. Jake was always charming. He had this way of getting people to like him, even when he was completely in the wrong. He coasted through school with mediocre grades because teachers liked him. He got out of trouble constantly because he could talk his way out of anything. Meanwhile, I worked my ass off and was still compared to him. Jake is just naturally gifted socially. You should try to learn from him, my parents would say. The real problem started when we got older. While I went to college and worked part-time to support myself, Jake bounced between different jobs, never lasting more than a few months. Every time he got fired, it was someone else's fault. His boss didn't appreciate him. His co-workers were out to get him. The job wasn't the right fit. He borrowed money from our parents constantly, and they always gave it to him, no questions asked. And then there was me. When I needed money during college for rent one time, my parents gave me a lecture about responsibility and told me to figure it out. Meanwhile, Jake was out there living rent-free in their house at 28, spending all his money on going out, and no one said a word about it. I learned early on that Jake saw me as his personal ATM. If I had anything, he felt entitled to it. My car? He wanted to borrow it all the time. My laptop? He used it whenever he wanted, even without asking. And when I finally started setting boundaries, he flipped out. He'd guilt-trip me, telling me that I was being selfish and that family helps family. And if that didn't work, he'd run to our parents, who would tell me to be a good little brother. Things got really bad after our mom passed away 5 years ago. Our dad was devastated, and Jake used that as an opportunity to milk him dry. He convinced our dad to give him access to his bank account to help manage finances, but all he did was drain money for himself. When I confronted him about it, he played dumb. Dad wanted me to have it, he said. He trusts me more with it than he trusts you. Then 2 years ago, our dad had a stroke. It was serious, and he couldn't live alone anymore. You know what Jake did? He disappeared. He moved to another city with his girlfriend and didn't even call. Guess who was left dealing with everything? Me. I was the one who arranged care for our dad. I was the one who managed his finances, making sure he was in a good facility. I was the one who visited him every week, while Jake ignored calls from me, from our dad, from everyone. At that point, I was done with him. I had spent my whole life cleaning up his messes, and I was tired. So, I cut him off. I stopped reaching out, stopped trying to make him act like a decent person, and just focused on taking care of our dad and living my own life. Fast forward to a month ago. Guess who came crawling back? Jake. Turns out his girlfriend kicked him out after he drained her finances too. He had no job, no money, and no place to stay. And suddenly, he remembered he had a brother. He showed up at my apartment, acting like nothing had happened. He tried to hug me, calling me little bro like we were kids again. I didn't let him in. I just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and asked him what he wanted. He gave me some sob story about how he fell on hard times and needed a place to crash. He said it would only be for a little while until he got back on his feet. I asked him, like how you were going to get back on your feet 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 2 years ago when you ditched Dad. He had the nerve to act offended. He started talking about how I was the one being cruel, how I was turning my back on family. I lost it. I told him that family isn't about blood, it's about how you treat people. And he had spent decades treating me like garbage. I told him I was done being his backup plan. He called me an asshole. He said I was being petty, that I was holding the past against him instead of helping when he really needed it. He said he had nowhere else to go and that I was kicking him while he was down. I told him, now you know how it feels. I shut the door in his face. Since then, I've been getting messages from family members telling me I'm being too harsh. Apparently, Jake has been calling everyone, spinning this story about how I refused to help my own brother when he was homeless. He conveniently left out all the years of manipulation, neglect, and outright theft. Even my aunt, who knows some of the history, told me that I should at least let him stay until he gets a job. She said, "You're not responsible for him, but wouldn't you want someone to do the same for you if you were in that situation?" And honestly, no, because I would never be in that situation. I take care of myself. I don't burn every bridge and then cry when there's no one left to save me. But a small part of me wonders if I went too far. Maybe I should have let him stay for a week or two. Maybe I should have at least helped him find a shelter or something. But another part of me knows that if I had let him in, he would have never left. So, AITA for refusing to help my brother after he burned every bridge with me? AITA for kicking my sister and her kids out after she took advantage of my kindness? I, 34M, have an older sister, Lisa, 39F, who has always been the type of person who thinks the world owes her something. Ever since we were kids, she had this entitlement about her, and for some reason, my parents always enabled it. If she wanted something, she got it. If I wanted something, I had to either work for it or hear about how Lisa needed it more. When we became adults, Lisa followed the same pattern. She never really held a stable job, always hopping from one thing to another. She would quit because her boss was rude or the job didn't respect her time. Meanwhile, I worked my way through college, got a decent career in IT, and built a stable life for myself. Lisa got married at 25 and had 3 kids in quick succession. Her husband, Matt, was a decent guy at first, but after a few years, he got fed up with her constant financial irresponsibility and walked out. I felt bad for the kids, but I didn't really get involved because I knew if I even opened that door a little, she would walk all over me. Fast forward to 6 months ago, Lisa called me out of the blue crying. She had lost her apartment after getting evicted. She had nowhere to go, and she begged me to let her and her kids stay with me just for a few weeks until she got back on her feet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I live in a 3-bedroom house. I told her she could have 1 bedroom, and the kids could share the other. I made it very clear that this was temporary and that she needed to be actively looking for a job in a new place. She swore up and down that she would, saying she just needed a little help. The first red flag was that she didn't even try to find a job. For the first few weeks, she claimed she was getting things settled for the kids, which I understood. But then weeks turned into a month, and she was still lounging around the house all day. I asked her about job applications, and she got defensive, saying it's hard as a single mom. I get it. Being a single parent is rough. But she wasn't even trying. Then the entitlement kicked in. She started taking over my house like it was hers. She moved my stuff around, started rearranging furniture, and even told me I should buy a bigger dining table because her kids needed more space. She never contributed to groceries. She expected me to feed her and her kids every day. At first, I didn't mind because they were going through a rough time, but after a while, I realized she was never planning on contributing. She just assumed I would pay for everything. Things hit a boiling point when I came home one day and found a dog in my house. A big dog. I don't own pets. I never said she could get a pet, but she just decided she was going to bring a dog into my home. When I confronted her, she acted like it was my fault for being upset. She said, "The kids need a pet. It's good for them." I lost it. I told her this was my house, and she didn't get to make decisions like that. She rolled her eyes and said, "Why are you being so difficult? It's just a dog." That night, I told her she had 1 month to figure something out. She got mad and said I was putting her and her kids on the street. I reminded her that she had 6 months and had done absolutely nothing to better her situation. She screamed at me, saying I didn't care about family and that I was kicking out my own niece and nephews. A few days later, I came home and found out she had thrown out some of my stuff to make more room for the kids. She threw away my gaming console, my books, and even some of my clothes. I saw red. I told her she had 1 week to leave. She started crying, calling our parents, telling them I was heartless and that I was making her homeless. My parents called me, demanding to know how I could do this to my own sister. I asked them, "If you're so worried, why don't you take her in?" Silence. Turns out, Lisa had burned bridges with them too. She had lived with them for a while before, and they couldn't deal with her anymore either. But they still expected me to put up with her nonsense. I stood my ground. 1 week later, she was out. She didn't even try to get a new place. She just moved in with a friend who I later found out kicked her out after 3 weeks for the same behavior. Now my family is split. My parents think I should have been more understanding. Some relatives think I did the right thing. My friends say I was way too patient. Lisa is still mad at me. She tells everyone I abandoned her and the kids. But I don't feel bad. I gave her 6 months of free housing, food, utilities, and even put up with her nonsense. So, AITA for finally kicking her out? AITA for refusing to attend my brother's wedding because he chose to invite his ex-girlfriend, who cheated on me years ago. I, 29F, have been in a difficult situation recently, and I'm honestly torn about whether I'm in the wrong here. Let me explain the background first, and then you can decide. So I have a brother, Jake, 32M, who's getting married in a couple of months to his fiancée, Amy, 30F. I've always been really close to Jake, and we've had a solid relationship growing up. I've been there for him through thick and thin, and I was honestly thrilled when he met Amy. She's a great person, and I genuinely liked her when we first got to know each other. They've been together for about 3 years now, and their relationship has always seemed pretty solid. However, there's a huge problem that I didn't expect to resurface, and it involves Jake's ex-girlfriend, Emily, 28F. Emily and I have a very complicated history. Let me go back to how everything went down. I met Emily about 5 years ago when Jake and she were in a serious relationship. At the time, I thought she was super nice, and we got along well enough. But that all changed when I found out that she had been cheating on Jake for almost a year with one of his close friends, Mark. I found out when I accidentally came across some messages between Emily and Mark, which were pretty explicit, and I was absolutely floored. I confronted Emily about it, and she tried to downplay everything, saying it was a mistake and didn't mean anything, but I knew better. She had been lying to Jake and to everyone around her. I felt terrible for Jake, but I couldn't keep the secret, so I told him everything. He was heartbroken and devastated. He and Emily broke up almost immediately after he found out, and needless to say, their relationship ended in a dramatic and painful way. The whole thing caused a huge rift in our family because Mark was also involved, and many people on both sides were upset about the way things unfolded. After the breakup, I didn't have any contact with Emily. I cut her off completely, and I expected Jake to do the same. It was awkward for a while because Emily was still around some family gatherings, and even though I tried to be civil, I couldn't forget what she did. Over the next couple of years, Jake moved on, and we never really talked much about Emily. It was understood that she was no longer a part of our lives. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, when Jake and Amy announced their wedding date. We were all excited, and things were moving along smoothly until Jake sent out the wedding invites. When I opened my invitation, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Emily's name was on the guest list. I couldn't believe it. I immediately texted Jake, asking if he was serious about inviting her. I had to double-check because I thought there must have been a mistake. Jake responded with a simple, "Yes, she's invited. She's part of Amy's extended friend circle, and we all agreed it was best to invite her." I was in shock. He didn't even mention that Emily had caused so much pain for our family years ago. To be honest, I felt completely blindsided. I asked him if he had thought this through, considering what Emily did to him, to me, and to our family. He said, Look, I understand your feelings, but I've moved on. Amy and I want all of our friends to be there, and Emily and I are on good terms now. I'm not going to let this one thing affect my wedding day. I was taken aback by how casually he brushed it off. It felt like he had forgotten the betrayal that had happened, like it didn't even matter anymore. I told Jake that I couldn't attend the wedding if Emily was going to be there. I've been trying to heal from what happened with her for years, and seeing her at his wedding would be way too much for me. I explained that I wasn't going to put myself in a situation where I'd have to act civil to someone who had hurt me so deeply. Jake didn't take it well. He said I was being unreasonable and that I was holding on to something that was in the past. He told me that I was letting my emotions control my actions and that it wasn't fair to ruin the wedding for everyone else. I tried to explain that it wasn't about ruining the wedding, but about my own mental health and boundaries. I didn't want to be around Emily, and it was triggering for me to even think about sitting in the same room as her on one of the happiest days of his life. I was hurt that he didn't understand where I was coming from, especially given how close we had been over the years. He kept insisting that I was being childish and that it was time to move on. He even said that if I didn't come, I was essentially making it about me and not about him. The argument escalated, and we didn't speak for a few days. Eventually, I texted him, trying to make peace, but also reaffirming that I couldn't attend the wedding with Emily being there. I told him I loved him and wanted to support him, but that I couldn't get past the past. Jake responded, saying that if I couldn't move on from this, then he didn't know what to say, but I was going to miss his wedding. He added that Amy was also upset with me because she felt like I was making a big deal out of nothing. Amy and Emily are apparently close, and they've been friends for a while now. That stung even more, to be honest. I had always liked Amy, and now it felt like she was taking Emily's side. I talked to a couple of friends about it, and their responses were all over the place. Some said I was in the right, that Jake was being insensitive and I had every right to protect my peace. Others said I was overreacting and should just suck it up for one day to keep the peace. I still feel like I'm in the right, but I can't help but feel guilty about the strain it's causing between me and my family, especially with Jake. He's been cold toward me since the argument, and now I'm not even sure if he's going to reach out before the wedding. I'm really struggling with whether I'm being too rigid about this. Am I holding on to something that happened a long time ago? Or do I have every right to stand my ground and protect my own well-being, even if it means not attending my brother's wedding? AITA for refusing to go to the wedding because of Emily's presence? Should I have just let it go for the sake of my brother? Or is this a valid boundary to set? AITA for refusing to let my brother move back in after he ruined my life years ago? I, 32M, have an older brother, Jake, 36M, who has always been the golden child in my family. Growing up, my parents idolized him. He was charismatic, athletic, and popular. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, nerdy kid who spent more time reading than playing sports. It was always clear who my parents preferred, even if they never said it outright. Jake got away with everything. If he failed a class, my parents blamed the teachers. If he got caught drinking underage, they said, "Boys will be boys." When I was late for dinner, I got grounded. When Jake wrecked my dad's car, they bought him a new one. I didn't resent him at first because I figured life would balance itself out when we got older. I believed that if I worked hard, I'd get ahead in life while Jake's reckless choices would catch up with him. I was wrong. After high school, I went to college on a scholarship. Jake, however, bounced between jobs and got involved with a bad crowd. He never had any real direction in life, but my parents always bailed him out of trouble. Whenever he needed money, they handed it over. Whenever he got into a fight, they defended him. Then, when I was 24, Jake did something that ruined my life. At the time, I had just graduated and landed a decent job. I was still paying off student loans, but I had my own apartment, a used car, and a steady income. Things were finally going well for me. Then Jake showed up at my door one night, looking desperate. He said he was in serious trouble and needed a place to crash just for a few days. I hesitated. I knew Jake's history, but he begged. He swore he had changed and just needed a little help getting back on his feet. Like an idiot, I believed him. That was the worst decision of my life. Within a week, my peaceful apartment turned into a nightmare. Jake never looked for a job. He slept all day, partied all night, and invited sketchy people over constantly. My fridge was always empty, because he ate everything in sight and never replaced anything. He even started borrowing money from my wallet. I confronted him multiple times, but he always had an excuse. I'll pay you back soon, or I just needed to relax a little before getting my life together. But the last straw came when I came home from work and found my apartment completely trashed. Jake had thrown a massive party while I was gone. There were broken bottles, spilled drinks, and cigarette burns on my couch. My laptop was missing. When I confronted him, he shrugged and said, "I needed some cash, man." He pawned my laptop, which had my work projects, my resume, and years of personal documents. He didn't even apologize. He just said, "I'll get it back. Don't worry." I kicked him out that night. I told him I didn't care where he went, but he was never setting foot in my apartment again. He called my parents, crying, and of course they took his side. My mom called me, furious, saying, "You don't turn your back on family." I told her that Jake stole from me and destroyed my home. She said, "He's just going through a hard time." I told him I was done. I went low contact after that. Jake bounced from place to place for years. He couch surfed, burned bridges, and kept making the same mistakes. Meanwhile, I worked my way up in my career, saved money, and bought a small house. My life finally felt stable. Then, 3 months ago, my parents called me and said Jake needed a place to stay again. I laughed. They said he was finally ready to change and needed my support. I told them I didn't believe that for a second. They pushed, saying, "He's your brother. Don't you want to help him?" I told them I already did, and he screwed me over. But they wouldn't drop it. They guilt me nonstop. They even tried getting extended family involved, saying things like, "How can you turn your back on your own blood?" I stood my ground. I told them Jake wasn't welcome in my home. Not after what he did. Then last week, Jake showed up at my house. I don't know how he found my address, but there he was, standing on my doorstep with a backpack, looking pathetic. He said, "I know I screwed up before, but I really need a place to stay, just for a little while." I told him no. He got angry. He said I was selfish and that I had plenty of space. I told him, "I gave you a chance once, and you ruined it." He called me a heartless bastard and stormed off. Now my family is losing their minds. My parents are saying I'm being cruel. My aunts and uncles are saying I should forgive and forget. Even some of my friends are saying I should have given him a second chance. But I don't trust him. I gave him a chance once, and he destroyed everything. I refuse to let him do it again. So, AITA? AITA for refusing to give my best friend the money I promised after she demanded I pay for her entire wedding? I, 27F, have been best friends with Emma, 26F, for about 10 years now. We met in high school and hit it off instantly. We were always the kind of friends who would drop everything for each other, so I always considered her a sister in my heart. Over the years, I've been there for her through many highs and lows, including her relationship with her now fiancé, James, 28M. A little background on Emma's life. She comes from a pretty well-off family. Her parents are very successful, and they've always been able to provide for her in ways that most people can't even imagine. She's always had a comfortable life and hasn't had to worry about money, really. She went to a private university, never had to take out loans, and her family's help with her career has been generous. I, on the other hand, didn't come from a wealthy family. My parents worked hard to provide for me, but there were times when we had to budget carefully. I went to a public university, worked multiple jobs throughout college, and now that I'm out of school, I'm still struggling with student loans and the high cost of living in a big city. I've been able to make ends meet, but I've had to be pretty careful with my finances. About 6 months ago, Emma got engaged to James. They are a lovely couple, and I was thrilled when I found out. We've been talking about her wedding plans for months, and she's been very open with me about what she wants. She's planning a big wedding, and it's going to be a beautiful event. When she first got engaged, she asked me to be her maid of honor, which of course I was honored to accept. I was excited to help her plan the wedding and stand by her side on her big day. A few weeks ago, Emma came to me with a very unexpected request. She told me that her wedding budget had been coming in higher than she anticipated and that her family wasn't going to be able to contribute as much as she thought. She mentioned that she had been looking into various ways to cut costs, but had decided that the only way to make her wedding vision come true was if I gave her a substantial amount of money to help cover the expenses. Specifically, she asked me for $15,000. Now, I'll admit, I was taken aback. I understand weddings are expensive, but $15,000 is a massive amount of money, especially for me. I've never had that kind of money just lying around. I told Emma that I didn't have anywhere near that amount of money and that I wouldn't be able to give her anything close to that. I also explained that I had my own financial struggles and I was still paying off my student loans and trying to save for my future. She seemed disappointed, but at first she was understanding. However, the next day, she reached out again with a new plan. She told me that she had thought about it and realized that I might not be able to give her $15,000 all at once, but she still really needed help. So, she asked if I could start contributing $2,000 a month until the wedding. I was stunned. This was on top of the other costs I was already incurring, like helping with her bridal shower and other wedding-related events, and I still couldn't understand why she was putting this financial burden on me. At this point, I said no again, explaining that there was no way I could make that work. I told her I wanted to help with other aspects of the wedding, like planning the bridal shower and helping with decorations, but I simply could not give her the money she was asking for. She was really upset by this, and we had a heated conversation about it. She told me that if I truly cared about her, I would help her make her dream wedding come true. She said that a maid of honor is supposed to be there for her, and that meant not just emotionally supporting her, but financially as well. I was absolutely floored. I reminded her that I had been by her side through everything, that I had supported her emotionally and helped her with so many other things over the years, and that this was just too much. I told her that I was happy to continue being her maid of honor, but I was not going to sacrifice my financial well-being for her wedding. She didn't take it well. Emma started calling me selfish, saying that I was being a bad friend, and that it was clear I didn't care about her happiness. She even suggested that if I wasn't willing to help her financially, I should step down as her maid of honor. I told her I wasn't going to back out of my role, just because I couldn't give her money, but I honestly felt like she was being incredibly unfair. After that conversation, things have been very tense between us. Emma hasn't spoken to me much, and when she has, it's been very cold. She's made a few passive-aggressive comments, like saying, it must be nice to have the luxury of not worrying about money, or, I guess not everyone can afford to help out their friends when they need it. It's honestly been hurtful. I've tried to reach out and offer other ways to help her with the wedding, like volunteering to help with planning and organizing, but she's not really receptive. It seems like she's holding a grudge, and it's been really hard for me to see her so upset with me over something I feel is unreasonable. Some of my friends have said that I should just give her the money because I'm her best friend, and it would be the right thing to do. Others have said that I'm not being unreasonable, and Emma is the one who's being out of line by expecting such a huge financial commitment from me. I'm feeling really conflicted because I do want to be there for her, but I also feel like I'm being asked to make a huge financial sacrifice that I'm just not in a position to make. I understand that weddings can be expensive, but I don't think it's fair for Emma to expect me to go into debt or make myself financially unstable just to cover her wedding expenses. So, AITA for refusing to give my best friend the money she's asking for? Am I being too rigid about this? Or is she being unreasonable in asking for such a large amount from me? I feel like I've done everything I can to support her, but this feels like too much. AITA for kicking my best friend out after he took advantage of my hospitality for months? I, 30M, have been best friends with Mark, 30M, since we were kids. We grew up on the same street, went to the same schools, and were practically inseparable. Mark was always the more carefree, adventurous type, while I was the responsible, goal-oriented one. I worked hard in school, got a steady job in IT, and bought my own house a few years ago. Meanwhile, Mark never really settled down. He bounced between jobs, traveled a lot, and always lived paycheck to paycheck. Despite our differences, we remained close. I always admired his free spirit, and he always said he envied my stability. We balanced each other out. That's why, when Mark hit a rough patch last year, I didn't hesitate to help him. It started when Mark lost his job. He had been working as a bartender, but the bar shut down unexpectedly. He didn't have savings and couldn't afford rent anymore. He asked if he could crash at my place for a month while he figured things out. Of course, I said yes. I had a spare room, and he was my best friend. At first, everything was fine. Mark was grateful, helped around the house, and even cooked dinner sometimes. But after the first month, things started to change. I noticed he wasn't really looking for a new job. He'd talk about applying places, but never actually did. He spent most of his time playing video games, watching TV, or scrolling on his phone. Every time I asked about his job hunt, he had some excuse. I need to find the right fit, or the job market is terrible right now. Then he stopped helping out around the house. Dishes piled up in the sink. He left clothes and trash everywhere. I'd come home from work to find him lounging on my couch, eating my food and acting like he owned the place. After 2 months, I sat him down and told him he needed to start contributing, whether that meant paying some rent, buying groceries, or at least keeping the house clean. He promised he would, but nothing changed. 3 months in, things got worse. Mark started inviting people over without asking me. I'd come home to find random friends of his hanging out in my living room, drinking and blasting music. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. because they were having a full-on party in my house. When I confronted him, he laughed it off and said, "You need to loosen up, man." I told him it wasn't about loosening up. It was about respect. He shrugged and said, "Dude, it's just for a little longer. I'll be out of here soon." But he wasn't. By the 4th month, I was at my limit. He still hadn't found a job, still wasn't helping around the house, and was still acting like my home was his personal playground. He even brought a girl over and let her stay for the weekend, without asking me. I barely knew her, and suddenly she was using my shower, eating my food, and treating my home like a hotel. I pulled Mark aside and told him enough was enough. I gave him 1 more month to get his act together, or he had to leave. He got defensive and said, "Wow, I thought you were my friend. I didn't know there was a time limit on helping someone out." I told him, "There isn't if the person actually tries to help themselves. But you're just taking advantage of me." He acted all offended, but promised he'd start looking for work. A month later, nothing had changed. That was it. I told him he had 1 week to pack up and leave. He flipped out, saying I was turning my back on him when he needed me most. He called me selfish and said, "After everything we've been through, you're just going to kick me out like some random stranger?" I reminded him that he had 5 months to get his life together, that he had used me and my generosity, that this wasn't a helping a friend situation anymore. It was him freeloading. He refused to leave at first, saying he had nowhere to go. But I stood firm. I told him that was his problem, not mine. Finally, after days of arguing, he packed his stuff and left. He didn't say goodbye. He just stormed out and slammed the door. Now our mutual friends are split. Some say I did the right thing. Mark was clearly taking advantage of me. Others say I was too harsh and that I should have been more understanding. Even Mark's mom called me, saying I should have let him stay until he found a job. I asked her, "Why didn't you take him in then?" She stammered and said, "Well, you already had space. I don't regret kicking him out, but part of me feels guilty. He was my best friend for years. But at what point does helping a friend turn into being used?" So, AITA? AITA for telling my sister she can't bring her baby to my wedding even though it's her only option for childcare. I, 28F, am getting married to my fiancé, Ben, 30M, in a few months. It's been a long engagement, and we've spent the last year planning every little detail of our big day. Ben and I are both really excited about it, and we're looking forward to celebrating with our closest friends and family. The issue that's been causing a lot of stress lately has to do with my sister, Kate, 26F. Kate and I have always had a complicated relationship. We're sisters, obviously, but we've never been the closest. Growing up, we fought a lot, and even though we're adults now, things are still a bit awkward between us. She's always been a bit of a free spirit, and I've always been the more responsible and organized one. But despite our differences, we've always tried to support each other, even if it's not always perfect. Kate recently had a baby, a little boy named Max, who's about 8 months old now. She and her boyfriend, Greg, are still figuring out the whole parenting thing, but they're doing okay, I guess. Kate is a stay-at-home mom right now, and while I love my nephew, it's been clear that having a baby has changed a lot of things in her life. She's become a lot more protective, and honestly, it feels like every time I try to talk to her about anything other than Max, she brings up how hard it is to manage everything with him. So, the wedding planning has been going smoothly until about a month ago when Kate asked me if she could bring Max to the wedding. At first, I was taken aback. The wedding is going to be at a beautiful venue, and we have a no-kids policy, because it's a formal event, and we want our guests to be able to enjoy the night without worrying about little ones. I politely told Kate that we had decided to have an adult-only wedding for a few reasons. We wanted the event to be more intimate, and frankly, we just didn't have the budget to accommodate kids. We also thought that it would be nice to give our guests a night off from childcare. Kate was immediately upset and asked if I was serious. She told me that there was no way she could come to the wedding without bringing Max because she didn't have anyone to babysit him. I told her that I understood, but the decision to not allow kids was final. She said that she didn't have any family in town who could help with the baby and that Greg wouldn't be able to make it either. So it was either bring Max or not come at all. I was frustrated at this point because it seemed like she was trying to force me to change my rules for her. I explained again that the no kids policy wasn't about her specifically, but about how we wanted the event to be. We've spent a lot of time and money on making this day perfect, and I didn't want to have to make exceptions. I also told her that I understood it might be difficult for her to find childcare, but I couldn't make an exception for just her. Kate didn't take it well. She started crying and said I was being unreasonable, that she had no choice but to bring Max because she was a single mom, which I don't really understand because she has a boyfriend, but whatever. She also said that I was being selfish for not considering her situation and that if I really cared about her, I would make an exception. I told her that I cared about her, but this was a decision I couldn't change, and I couldn't let her dictate the terms of my wedding. A few days later, she called me and asked again, pleading with me to let her bring Max. She told me that if I didn't let her, she wouldn't be able to come to the wedding at all. I told her that it was heartbreaking to hear that, but the policy stood, and if she couldn't find a way to get childcare, then I would miss her being there, but that was the reality. She said that she couldn't believe I would ruin our relationship over this, and that I was being inconsiderate of her needs as a mother. I started feeling guilty, but then I reminded myself that this was my wedding, and I had the right to make decisions that would make me feel comfortable. The situation has escalated. Kate is now refusing to speak to me, and I'm starting to feel the pressure from our family. Our parents have called me multiple times to say that I should make an exception for Kate, that she's been going through a lot since having the baby, and that I shouldn't be so rigid with my wedding plans. They keep saying that it's just one baby and that I'm being selfish for not letting her come with him. I've tried explaining my reasoning, but it feels like no one is listening to me. Ben has been supportive of my decision, but I can tell he's getting frustrated with the situation too. He doesn't want me to feel guilty or pressured, but he also doesn't want to deal with the fallout from my family. It's honestly causing a lot of stress, and I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm being put in a terrible position. On the one hand, I understand Kate's frustration as a new mom, but on the other hand, I feel like my wedding is my one day to have things go the way I want them to. I'm also starting to wonder if I've been too rigid about the no kids policy. Is it unreasonable for me to stand my ground on this? Should I just let Kate bring Max and avoid further conflict? Or am I right to maintain my decision, even though it's causing a rift in the family? AITA for refusing to let my sister bring her baby to my wedding, even though she says she has no other childcare options? AITA for refusing to let my fiancé's mom move in with us after she got evicted. I, 29F, have been with my fiancé, Dan, 32M, for 3 years now, and we've been living together for almost 2. We have a really good relationship, and I love him deeply, but we've recently hit a major roadblock regarding his mom, Linda, 55F, who has been a huge source of tension between us. To give you some background, Linda has always had a somewhat strained relationship with Dan. She's been through a series of failed relationships and has had financial problems for as long as Dan can remember. She has never been particularly independent, and over the years, she's relied on Dan for a lot of things, whether it be emotional support, financial help, or just general caretaking. I've always known that Linda was a big part of Dan's life, but I never really understood the extent of it until we moved in together. When we first moved into our apartment, Dan and I made it clear that it would be a space just for us. We wanted to establish boundaries and ensure that we could have time to ourselves without constant interference. I thought we were on the same page about this, and things were going smoothly. But about 6 months ago, Linda's living situation took a turn for the worse. Linda had been renting a house for the past few years, but she recently got evicted due to failing to keep up with rent payments. She's always struggled with her finances, and it's been an ongoing issue. Dan has helped her out with money several times, but she never seemed to learn from her mistakes, and now she was facing the consequences. When I first heard that she was evicted, I was sympathetic. I felt bad for her, and I didn't want her to end up homeless. But I didn't realize how much it would affect us until Dan brought up the idea of having her move in with us. I'll admit, when Dan first mentioned it, I was in complete shock. I didn't even know how to respond. Our apartment is small, and we've worked hard to make it a space that's just for us, and the idea of having his mom move in felt like an intrusion. I immediately told Dan that I didn't think it was a good idea. I explained that it would put a lot of strain on our relationship and our space. Dan was upset but promised that it would only be temporary, just until Linda got back on her feet. He said that he didn't want her to be on the streets and that we had the space to help her out. I tried to explain to Dan that while I understood his desire to help his mom, I didn't feel comfortable with the idea of her moving in. I also reminded him that we had agreed that our apartment would be a place where we could have privacy and quiet time without worrying about outside interference. He assured me that it would be fine, that his mom would be respectful of our boundaries, and that it would be a short-term situation. But as much as I tried to understand his perspective, I couldn't shake the feeling that this would turn into a much bigger problem than he realized. I tried to come up with a compromise. I suggested that maybe Linda could stay with her sister, who lives nearby, or find a temporary place to rent. Dan said that her sister's place wasn't an option, and finding another rental would be difficult given Linda's financial situation. I get that, but it still didn't sit right with me. I didn't want her moving in. Not only would it be a massive disruption to our life, but it also made me feel like my feelings were being dismissed. After a few weeks of back-and-forth discussions, Dan finally convinced me to give in. He said that it would only be for a few months, and I agreed reluctantly, hoping that once Linda was settled, she would move out and things would go back to normal. I felt a sense of unease about it, but I didn't want to cause a huge rift with Dan over this. So, we agreed that Linda could move in. The first week wasn't too bad. Linda was quiet, kept to herself, and didn't make any major demands. But things quickly started to unravel. Linda would often leave her things all over the apartment, and I began to feel like my space was being invaded. I would come home after work and find her sitting on the couch watching TV, taking up space that was supposed to be for us. I tried to brush it off at first, but it started to build up, and I began feeling frustrated. It didn't help that Linda had no intention of moving out after the initial few months period. She started talking about how comfortable she was and how she felt right at home in our apartment. At this point, I felt like I was trapped. I didn't want to start a fight with Dan, but I also didn't want to spend my days feeling like I couldn't relax in my own home. I started bringing it up to Dan more seriously, but every time I mentioned how uncomfortable I was, he'd dismiss it and say that I was overreacting. He told me that I had to understand that she had nowhere else to go, and that it was just temporary. I felt like I was going crazy. I started to realize that I had been too accommodating, and now I was stuck in a situation that was making me miserable. Then, things took a turn when Linda started demanding more. She asked if we could help her financially, cover her bills, and even get her a new car since her old one had broken down. Dan was all for it, of course, but I was getting increasingly frustrated. I had agreed to let her stay with us, but I never agreed to take on the financial burden of supporting her. I had my own student loans and bills to pay, and I couldn't keep up with her constant requests for help. I tried to tell Dan that this wasn't fair, but he kept saying that we needed to be there for his mom, that she was in a tough spot, and that she would help us out if we ever needed it. But I didn't want to constantly have to cater to Linda's needs at the expense of our own well-being. Finally, I hit my breaking point. One afternoon, I came home from work to find that Linda had gone through my personal things without asking. She had rearranged some of my clothes and even used some of my makeup. I was beyond livid. When I confronted her about it, she acted like it was no big deal, saying that she thought I wouldn't mind. I felt completely disrespected, and I had had enough. I told Dan that I couldn't live like this anymore. I asked him to have a serious conversation with Linda about moving out. I explained that I was uncomfortable with the way things were going, and that it was affecting our relationship. Dan got defensive and said that I was being selfish, that I should be grateful we were able to help his mom. He told me that if I couldn't handle her living with us, maybe we should reconsider getting married. That hit me hard. I felt like I had been pushed into a corner, and now my fiancé was making me feel guilty for setting a boundary. I'm not heartless. I want to help people, but I don't feel like it's right to sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of someone else's comfort. I'm at my wit's end. I love Dan, but I feel like I'm losing myself in this situation. I don't know if I'm being too harsh, if I should just suck it up and live with it for the sake of my fiancé, or if I have every right to stand my ground and ask for Linda to move out. So, AITA for refusing to let my fiancé's mom live with us indefinitely, even though she has nowhere else to go.